And he was saying, well, this used to be, and I forgot what country it is. This used to be all.
I want to walk you to the Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School class. And today, we're going to start a two-part series by Ted Levterov, who is with the White Estate here at Loma University. What is that? It's a branch.
Yeah, it's a branch
office. Okay. Ted is from Bulgaria, and he's been with us a couple of times. I don't know if it was the last time or the time before you showed pictures of Bulgaria, and that's quite a beautiful place. Yeah, it's even nicer than Romania, Peter. No.
Don't go there.
Don't go there. Yeah, but seriously, you know, for myself, you know, Bulgaria, you know, it's kind of. Is that like Lower Slavovia, you know? But it's seriously, it's a very lovely, you had lovely pictures, and I don't know why you left there. But anyway, Ted came from Bulgaria. He was a pastor in Bulgaria and went to Andrews, where he worked on the dissertation, got his PhD, went to Dallas, Texas, and there he pastored for 5 years. And then you came here, and you've been here, what, 4 or 5 years now?
5 years.
5 years, okay. And so, anyway, so Ted is going to be speaking to us on accepting LOI, early Seventh-day Adventists, and the gift of prophecy dilemma. As I said, he'll be here next week as well, and so we look forward to your presentation this week and next, but shall we just bow our heads? Again, we thank you that we can be here today. Be with Ted in a special way as he presents to us. Continue to watch over us. We ask in your name. Amen.
Morning, everyone. Morning. It's always a joy to be here and see some Romanians. You know, we are cousins, right? So, I'm glad to present a little bit of my studies and my book. That was, I don't know why the confusion was, but David invited me to present the material, what I have here. And it's about 4 or 5 chapters, although it kind of looks small, but we couldn't find, you know, my time schedule is kind of busy, so we couldn't find 4 Sabbaths in a row. So we'll try to do it in 2. If we don't succeed, I'll come again, okay, sometime. But we'll try to cover half of the material this time, and then next Sabbath, and it deals with the history of how Adventists or early Sabbath keeping Adventists accepted the gift of prophecy. Now, this is always a difficult topic. It's a peculiar belief that we have, right? And I think that it will go on as a topic of discussion and arguments until, I think, the second coming, okay, because just of its nature. I mean, how do you explain spiritual things, right? So, but it's a good thing to see at least the history, and hope that through the historical development that I will cover, you will get a better picture of how, you know, this argument went back and forth, and where you stay on the topic. So this time we will cover the history up to 1860s, 1863, when we organized officially as a Seventh-day Adventists. So we will deal with the early Sabbath keeping, and I'll make a distinction, okay? We will not talk about Seventh-day Adventists today, because there was no Seventh-day Adventists until 1863. But we will talk about the Sabbath-keeping Adventists and how they dealt with it and why. This is a little just an introductory note. So today we'll look at the early years, the 40s and 1850s, and I will begin by giving you the contextual religious environment of the 19th century, because context is always important, okay? I remember, I don't know if I've told you the story when I was here last time, but I remember when I decided to come and study at the United States, and I got accepted. I Googled, I went to Dr. Google and I tried to find out a little bit about your culture. And I read that you guys have this football league. And I got really excited. I still remember running to my dad. He was eating his lunch. It's like, Dad, I'm gonna be okay? Because I like, you know, real football, soccer. So I went to my dad and I said, listen, I mean, they have this National Football League. I mean, this is great. And then I came here and I realized that what you mean by football, it's really an egg, right? And it has nothing to do with the foot, right? These guys fight and so. But anyway, we'll not go there. But context is always important. So in order to understand how Adventists related to Ellen White and why they began to discuss her gift, we have to understand the context. And then we'll look at some initial arguments and early attitudes. And then we will try to cover, I hope we can, part 2 of the book. And if you buy the book, you will have all the material there and the details. But you will see how Adventists began to deal with the biblical foundation of their belief in the gift of prophecy. They had to go now to the Bible and find some defense of why they believed in Ellen White because of controversies. Now, sometimes contemporary Seventh-day Adventists, or we as a church, think that, you know, the discussion about Ellen White and the controversy really began in 1970s, 1980s with round numbers and all these, you know, people, but actually started quite early in the 1850s, and you will see that. So we'll see how they defend it, and then next time we will look at the 60s and the 70s, 1860s and 70s, when the prophetic gift became a part of our doctrinal belief system. And I'll show you the very first kind of a creeds that we published, although they didn't believe in creeds, but you will see how it became part of that. And then in the last part, we will see how they redefined, they had to clarify, refine the issue of Ellen White, particularly in relation to inspiration and revelation. And I think that that's where most of the questions today are. So, but we'll see that next time, okay? So we'll try to do that. Okay, let's begin, since I don't have much time. Let's begin with part 1 of the discussion. And as I said, the understanding or the acceptance of the early Sabbath-keeping Adventists on this topic, on the gift of prophecy of Ellen White, has to be examined or understood within the context of the 19th century. I think that sometimes missing that creates additional problems for Seventh-day Adventists, because in the early 1800s you have the Christianity in this nation being quite charismatic or open to this charismatic and emotional, you know, religious climate that people experienced. So, and I think that there are 4 factors, at least that I have discovered, and those are general, of course, that influence Adventists in their attitudes towards Ellen White. Now, I'll begin with the big one, which is really the Second Great Awakening, right? You know your general history, you know that it, you had the First Awakening, you know, early in the, late in the 18th century, and then the Second Great Awakening began in the beginning of the 19th century. And it was really, what was interesting about that is that it was quite open to charismatic and visionary manifestations. It was just the nature of this awakening. It was people thought that through conversion, if you really believed in Jesus, if you really accepted Christ, you had to experience some kind of unnatural manifestation, including visions. So that's why historians talk about, you know, Christianity being, you know, part of this intense emotionalism and supernatural encounters and so forth. And I give an example in the book with the famous preacher of the Second Great Awakening, Charles Finney, who really was the one who developed these new methods of conversion. And you know how on Sabbath, you go to church and the pastor, or before the prayer, the general prayer, they will invite you to come forward, if you have burdens. You know that? I mean, it really comes from Charles Finney. Because he came with these new methods of how really to convert, or how to make people think about God or be converted to Christianity and so forth. So he came with and I mentioned, those are just few of the examples, the rest in the book, but he came with these protracted meetings. In other words, these were like revival series that we have. They go more than one day, right? A whole week, and people will get together and listen and so forth. He came with the idea of anxious seed, that people came forward and they were prayed by the pastor by their name for the first time. And even women and children could come forward and express their experiences and so forth. So you have this really more charismatic and visionary manifestations within the Christianity. This is a quote by Nathan Hatch, who writes on this topic when he examines the Christianity in the United States, that during that time scores of preachers' journals from Methodists and Baptists, from North and South, in other words, he's saying everyone, okay, from white and black, indicated already acceptance to consider dreams and visions as inspired by God. What is the word? Normal manifestation. So in other words, if you really converted to God and you experience some kind of a vision or charismatic, experience, that was okay. That was a normal manifestation of the Spirit of God, of the divine. So you have this huge, general climate. Then we come to the camp meeting phenomena that really developed during that time, during the time of the Second Great Awakening. And I think that's another reason of this general climate. Again, highly charismatic worship. And the model for camp meetings, what really was a camp meeting, came from this meeting in Kentucky, the Cane Ridge Camp Meeting in 1801, which really described this kind of charisma, what really happened there. And if you go on page 18, I give a little description that it's very significant. I mean, you can just see what people did on camp meetings. Okay, I'll not read it just to save time, but you will see a lot of emotionalism, people falling down and so forth. So really, the Cane Ridge became the model of what a real camp meeting was all about. A lot of dramatic physical manifestations, visions, people speaking in tongues and so forth, okay? But that was the climate. Now, by the way, nobody got shocked or surprised. It was expected that you should manifest. I mean, it's a different climate. Do you see the context? Now, if I come today with something like that and I tell you, I had a vision yesterday night about you, I mean, you'll probably send me to the ER, to get checked. Because we're more skeptical, right? But not in the 19th century. So it was normal.
72 hours, I can say.
That's right. Women and children participated, and I'll show you that. So let me just give you one example here that I have it. Peter Cartwright was a preacher of the Second Great Awakening. So he describes, now these are primary sources, okay? He describes what happens during one of his camp meetings. My voice was strong and clear, and my preaching was more of an exhortation and encouragement than anything else. My text was, the gates of hell shall not prevail, in about 30 minutes. So he's preaching, okay, just imagine that, in about 30 minutes. The power of God fell on the congregation in such a manner as it seldom seen. The people fell in every direction, right and left, front and rear. It was supposed that not less than 300 fell like dead men in mighty battle. Our meeting lasted all night, and Monday night. And when we closed on Tuesday, there were 200 who had professed religion, in other words, converted to God. and about that number joined the church. Do you see that? That's a camp meeting in the 19th century. Okay, so people converted, they were expected to experience this kind of things. Now, gradually the camp meeting was kind of occupied by the Methodists. Okay, some people, because of different fanatic appearances, left it, but Methodists really continued with that. And you remember that Ellen White was part of the Methodist tradition, and the Methodists really became known as the shouting Methodists. So you go to a Methodist camp meeting and you'll experience, this charismatic phenomena. And I write here, they, for example, as the preacher went on, preaching, it's often that they interrupted the preaching with shouts of hallelujah, amen, glory, 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 3 times. Eventually the Methodists in America became known as the shouting Methodists. That's how that was their nickname. Okay, so this phenomenon is going on. Now they gave opportunities to women and children also to preach for the first time, so they could participate and also share their own testimonies. That was something new. And I give the example film with Phoebe Palmer. In fact, she was really strong promoter of women. She said, no, according to the Bible, God gives His Spirit to both men and women. And she went into all these contemporary Adventist arguments, okay? So you can read it in the book. I plan to read it, but my time is really flying, okay? So anyway, so you have this but you see the context, this supernatural environment, and it's part of the of that time. Benjamin Abbott, the Methodist, writes, the next meeting day in time of preaching, we had a powerful time, and a number fell to the floor. You see the same thing. One man attempted to run off, but God laid him down at the door. A woman made the same attempt, but the Spirit of the Eternal God arrested her, and she fell back into the house just as she was going out of the door. After preaching, we had a blessed time in class. While claiming the promises, several were soon down, both on the right and left. Some found peace, and others professed sanctification. Okay, so you see these charismatic, again, appearances. And the fourth, I think, general phenomena that you see is the emergence of new religious groups that were led by a charismatic leader that started to appear here. And there's a book by Susan Juster, and I give you some statistics here in the book. But Susan Juster has done research only on published materials, okay? So those are materials that have been published, and she has found out, let me give you the exact number on page 17. She has found out that there has been at least 315 men and women who were recognized as prophets in England and North America in the period between 1750 and 1820. Now, she is making, however, another observation that I think is significant. She says, but my research is only on published sources. Since many people did not keep a journal or anything like this, probably the number is much higher. And if you read some of the statements of James White, you will see that they really believed that they were, this prophetic phenomena was there. The true prophetic phenomena. So, but you have these religious groups of prophets that appear, and of course you have the famous one, Ann Lee and the Shakers, Joseph Smith. What am I really interested in, what really it's related to Seventh-day Adventism is this group. The Christian Connectionists, or the Christians. They were really people that wanted, they even didn't want to have a name, because a name was associated with Babylon according to their belief. And so they called themselves Christians, and they said, listen, we really don't want to have any formal creed. We believe the Bible, and we want to really worship God as the first church, as the apostles and so forth. But what is interesting about this group is that they really believed in the doctrine of spiritual gifts, including the gift of prophecy. And they said, listen, those gifts should continue until the end of time. So that's very central in their theology of this group. Let me give you their, this was one of their famous theologians, William Kincaid. He writes to say, God calls these gifts to cease, because many Christians believe that, you know, the gifts ceased with Christ, then with the apostles, okay? So he said, to say that God calls these gifts to cease is the same as to say God has abolished the order of the New Testament church. To divest the church of all the spiritual gifts would be to take from the body of Christ the sense of hearing, smelling, seeing, etc. Why this group? It's really interesting. And I give a little bit more details in the book. Because James White and Joseph Bates were part of this group. You see that? So for them, believing in these spiritual gifts, manifestations, and the gift of prophecy was kind of natural. I mean, that's their theology. Okay? So all this background, I think, context is important, because you have Ellen White, who is immersed into that movement with her Methodist tradition, and you have Joseph Bates, James White from the Christian Connectionist group. So they had what I call, you know, they had these natural inclinations towards the gift of prophecy. Now, before we go to the how early Sabbath-keeping Adventists reacted to Ellen White, let me mention something about the Millerites' attitude towards that, because Millerism became part of this great Second Awakening. Okay, so how and since Adventists, I mean, we came from the Millerites, how did the Millerites react to that? Well, to say the least, the attitude of the Millerites was kind of complex. And it's, I mean, we can spend the whole session just on that. But you have the leadership of the Millerites that is very much against any of those visionary claims, charismatic claims. I mean, they're kind of against, and I think that there's a reason for that I'll share with you. To such an extent that Millerism officially came with official resolutions disapproving such visions, manifestations, you know, as untrue, as unbiblical. So if you go to their Facebook, you know that they had a Facebook. Well, it's called, you know, the Midnight Cry. It's a periodical. But that was really their Facebook. That's where they discuss things, they argue, they post questions, and, you know, shared songs and pictures. And I mean, it was really a Facebook. So they came with resolutions disapproving, and I think I have one that I'm gonna read to you, before and after the disappointment. So here's one, and there are several that you find. This is in the Morning Watch. We have no confidence, they write. Now this is official from their general conference. We have no confidence in any new messages, visions, dreams, tongues, miracles, extraordinary gifts, revelations, impressions, discerning of spirits or teaching, not in accordance with the unadulterated Word of God. So they were really against that. So the leadership is against that. But why it's complex? Because if you went to Millerite worships during that time, you experienced the same thing. Okay? So they were open to these manifestations. And you have also some Millerites that claimed visionary manifestations. Now you have this famous Israel Diamond trial, right? And whatever you think about the trial, one thing is clear, that there were at least 5 prophets in the main area, and one of them was Ellen White. So it's very obvious that there were people who claimed visionary manifestations. Samuel Snow. Now, do you know this guy, Samuel Snow? He came with the date October 22, 1844. Okay? So that's why he's a significant figure in Millerism. But Samuel Snow proclaimed himself that he had visions and he was the new Elijah. And he even published a book because some of the leadership like Miller and Himes, they said, come on, you're getting crazy, you know, you should not believe in these things. And he wrote a book and he assigned them to the book of judgments because they rejected his prophetic reality. And I give you the story here. The book is called the Book of Judgment, delivered to Israel by Elijah, the messenger of the everlasting covenant, which is him. Right? So you see, you have the leadership that it's against. They come with official resolutions, but the reality among the Millerites, it's different. So it's in this context that Ellen White claimed prophetic manifestations. You see that? Okay. And the Sabbath-keeping Adventists had to defend her gift in that environment that is going on. So this is the big picture. So let's go quickly to. I don't think we'll cover the two parts today, but we'll go at least one. Okay? What was the initial purpose of the arguments, at least as far as I have discovered? Well, they had to establish the biblical authority for Ellen White's gift. That was their first objection. Now, you will see that they began explaining the gift of prophecy in a very simple terms. But as you will see next time, it became more and more complicated. And I think that by the 1880s, okay, you have all the arguments for and against that you see today. They develop until that time. After that, it's just, you know, little variations, but most of. So, but it became in a very, they became to defend the gift in a very simple terms. Like, you know, she's a nice lady, we need to believe her. Okay, that was an argument. She cannot lie. I mean, she's a good Christian. But it became more complicated. And number two, they had to distinguish Ellen White from what they considered a lot of false manifestations. So they believed that there was the true gift of prophecy, but also there were a lot of scammers, so to say, you know. The false manifestation. And spiritualizers and so forth. So the initial arguments, the initial purpose was concentrated in these 2 points. And by 1840s or 1850s, I should have written there, they developed 4 arguments. So let's go quickly through that. Number one, they began to write on their Facebook, Review and Herald, okay, that the Bible is really in support of the display of the gift of prophecy. They said there's no question that the Bible really informs us that we should look for visions. And they began to, you know, use different verses to show that. Joseph Bates, in fact, wrote in his book, A Seal of the Living God, that if you have no faith in visions, you have no faith in the Bible. What is he really saying? Well, the Bible really tells us their visions. So that's how they began in a very general term to describe their support, the gift of prophecy as they experienced Ellen White. By the way, I mean, I'm just giving you points. For us, you know, it's easier to understand, but it was a complex process. They gathered together and some did not believe in the argument and so forth. But in general terms, that's what they established in the beginning. Number two, they said, if we really believe that we live in the last days, which they believed that they did, right? Based on Acts 2, and they connected it with Joel 2, we really need to see the gift of prophecy displayed, the true gift of prophecy. Okay? So they said the Bible talks about it, and if we really, as you know, as Sabbath-keeping Adventists, if we really believe that Jesus is coming soon, and that was their, you know, whole platform, they came from the Millerites, I mean, we really need to see that. Okay? And this became one of the most used arguments in defense of Ellen White if you read the early publications of Review and Herald. In fact, some even began to write articles and say, this is a sign that we are the true people of God because we have this gift. Right? Something that, you know, even you read today in some publications. So that was the second argument. The third one was that Ellen White's visions among believers had really a positive influence. And they said, listen, I mean, if you really know Ellen White, if you really meet her personally, okay? If you have this personal experience with her and her gift, I mean, you can see that she's really a good person. And she's very honest and so forth. So it was based on a personal experience with the gift, so to say. And I give in the book the story of Joseph Bates because you know that for Joseph Bates, who was one of the founders of the Sabbatarian group, did not believe in Ellen White for about 2 years. He had problems with that. He said, I'm not sure, maybe, you know, she... And so he tried to examine her and so forth, so for about 2 years, and I give the story in the book. And after that, he said, okay, now I can believe, all right? So that was another argument of the believers. They call it the good fruits, okay? The Ellen White's gift brings good fruits and so forth. And of course, you could see some people began to talk about the unifying power of Ellen White's visions when they had these early Sabbath conferences, 1848 to 1850. I mean, it was a small group discussing different theological issues or lifestyle issues and so forth. And Ellen White was present, and sometimes she would have a vision, and people say, well, look at her visions. They bring us to unity and so forth. So you have that as well in the background. And number 4, you have the existence of counterfeit prophets. How did the early Sabbath-keeping Adventists use that? Well, they said, listen, the mere fact that they are false prophets only confirm the fact that there must be true. Okay? If they are false prophets, there must be true ones. I mean, that's very logical. And so for the question for Sabbath-keeping Adventists was not whether modern prophets existed, okay? The question for them was how to distinguish between true and false prophets. And that's where their, initial arguments came. So it's not, oh, prophecy, the gift of prophecy exists. I mean, it was obvious. There were so many people. But the question was how to now the true and the false displays. Okay, so in summary, the very early years of 1840s and 1850s, these are the four arguments that they really began. The biblical validity, they said, well, the Bible supports that, so we need, that's very clear, and they began. Now, they would develop that much better during the, with times, but they were certain that the Bible supports the gift of prophecy. Then they used the last days manifestation of the Holy Spirit, and they used, Acts 2. In fact, James White wrote a very interesting article, in which he argued that Acts 2 was not really fulfilled during the time of the apostles. He said it was only partially fulfilled, but the true fulfillment was in their days. Okay, so they used that as a validity for their gift. And then they talked about the personal experience, the positive fruits. Ellen White is a nice person, so we better believe her. You see, very, very, very general, simple arguments. And lastly, they try to differentiate, try to distinguish Ellen White's gift as a true manifestation from the counterfeit prophets. Okay, so it is in this context that you see how they began to develop the doctrine. Now, I don't know if we have only 5 minutes, so let me go and start with part 2, and then we'll continue, okay, with next time, wherever we finish. After their initial kind of acceptance, I mean, it took them time, okay? And there were still some Sabbath-keeping Adventists that were doubtful. They didn't believe Ellen White. And that was okay. You will see why. Because Ellen White was not a test of fellowship for the Adventists. Okay? But after that initial kind of discussion on the topic, they experienced the first internal controversial, clash over the gift of prophecy. And it happened in 1851, 1853, 4, 5, during that time, when you have the first offshoot. So we still don't have a church, we just have a group. But out of that group, you have an offshoot called the Messenger Party and then the Age to Come movement, those two movements, who had problems with Ellen White's claims to prophetic authority or to prophetic gift. Okay? And it was led by some leaders, especially in Iowa. And they began and they published a periodical called The Messenger of Truth. I have the original copies. I'll make sure to bring it next time so you can see them. Okay? But this is something that I discovered, and I'll finish with this story and we'll continue next time. But The Messenger of Truth was the first periodical that was published against the gift of Ellen White. The first official periodical published against Ellen White, and it came in 1854. As far as I have determined, there are about 6 to 8 issues, and I have discovered only 3. When I was doing my dissertation, I was reading on Facebook in Review and Herald that Adventists are reacting to the messengers. Okay? And I read this Messenger of Truth. So I went to my professor, I said, where can I read, this stuff? To see the context, what they wrote and what Adventists responded to. And he said, well, we don't have copies of that. But being a Bulgarian, you're not satisfied with that, right? So I went to Google and I tried to search and I didn't find anything. So I said, okay, so there are no copies. And I'll finish, okay, with the story. And in few months, I had to write a paper on religious liberty, and I decided to write on the religious liberty, the development of religious liberty in Bulgaria. So I needed some books, to borrow from the Library of New York and the Library of Pennsylvania, and I started searching their web pages, and I discovered, it was by chance, I typed Messenger of Truth and I discovered that there are 3 issues in the State Library of Pennsylvania. And anyway, it took a long time, about 8 months, until we got copies of that, but I'll show you. I'll try to bring it next time. But that's how we have the first periodical that was published against Ellen White. And if you read, you will see that, and we'll start next time from here, that they had a problem with the Sabbath-keeping Adventists. They said, listen guys, you talk about the Bible, but you really have another rule of faith. Okay, you have the visions for you are more important than the Bible. And it's a test of fellowship, and she comes from the wrong gender. So next time I'll show you. That's really an interesting argument. But we'll continue next time. Thank you.
Okay, Ted. Just stay up here because you'll be the focus continuing. At this time, we'll entertain questions to ask Dr. Levterov. I see a hand up here. Associate Dean.
Oh, okay. So I better behave.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ted. This is great. Great stuff. So here's my question. As you know, Methodism was founded in many ways by John Wesley. Charismatic, powerful preacher, wrote and led the movement. And to this day, Methodism esteems him greatly. And as you mentioned, Ellen White flows out of Methodism. And also charismatic figure that many argue founded Adventism. So why is it that Adventists esteemed her to such an extent where they argued that she had the gift of prophecy, and we wrestled with that, as you know, whereas the Methodists did not, right? They were comfortable with just having Wesley be a charismatic leader who founded the church. Why did we move in a different direction? Is there anything that can help us understand that? And then, I guess, a second question, to what extent is Adventism to this day, or back then, influenced by Methodism?
Yeah, great question. I think that Methodism is also has its own interesting history, because Methodism in Europe or in Great Britain, right, where Wesley began, it was quite different than Methodism in the United States. In fact, there's some evidences that even Wesley, when he came here, you know, he kind of acted differently. It changed also. And I think because of the bigger background of the Second Great Awakening, all this whole phenomena that was going on, of charisma, and if you really converted, you had to show some kind of, you know, extraordinary manifestation. And if not, you were really not converted. I mean, you are saying it, but really it's not in your heart. You see that? So I think that the Methodism in the United States was influenced by the general charisma that was going on, which influenced to a great degree even John Wesley. There are some studies, at least, and I'm, you know, that I have read, but they say that even John Wesley preaching, he was different than in Europe because of that. And so in that sense, I think that Ellen White being part of the American Methodism influenced her in a different way. Now, your second question, why? I don't know. It's Ellen White claimed that she had a vision. How do you prove that? I mean, that's what the struggle was, right? She claimed, and they were forced to believe or disbelieve. And I mean, by the way, she did not impose her gift on people. It's very interesting. You will see next time. She said, well, he doesn't believe, that's fine. I mean, give him space, you know, it's okay. So why is that? I don't know. It was just that she claimed, and John Wesley didn't claim that that gift. Good questions. Thank you.
Even today in Adventism, we have people who will go to camp meeting and appreciate camp meeting preaching, and we have others who are not edified by what they would hear even at an Adventist camp meeting. And so it was in Methodism, because the Methodist church, the Chestnut Street church that she attended, the poorer people sat up in the balcony and they liked to shout, but the wealthier people who had paid for the pews down here, they were not edified by the shouting. And so there was a difference there already. And so she was in between the modern Methodists and the shouting Methodists. But I want to ask a question or raise a observation here. When we look at these four arguments that they used, I'm thinking that if I'm a Mormon in that time, I could use all four of those arguments for Joseph Smith. Now, of course, when the Mormons got to the fourth argument, they would argue that Ellen White was not a true prophet, and when the Adventists got to the fourth argument, they would argue that Joseph Smith was not. But all four of those arguments you could use for Joseph Smith. I mean, I'm sure Mormons they thought it was the last days. And so
I think you're absolutely correct. I think that they used the same thing, and that's what I said. That the gift of prophecy, I mean, it's really a dilemma. Do you believe in that or not? Because you deal with a spiritual claim that you really cannot prove, right? How do you prove that I had a vision? Go and do it, you see? So you better pray I don't, because I'm a Bulgarian, you know, so I may trick you. But yes, the Mormons used a lot of the, and I think that during that time, I mean, the Adventists did not have this negativity towards the gift of prophecy. In fact, and Ron, you know that James Wire even claimed that there are a lot of people that had true visions. In fact, in the early periodicals, in the early issues of Review and Herald, he published dreams by people that had visions, including William Miller. because I think they tried to convert Miller to to Sabbath-keeping Adventist group. I think, you know, Otis Nichol wrote him a letter about Ellen White, and James White published how Miller had a dream and a vision. And he said, look what is going on. So this is not unusual, but you are right. The same arguments. Now, it became later more complicated, as you will see next time. The controversies began to appear, and we became more picky and so forth. But I agree with that.
I've got a question, and this is out of ignorance. It seems to me that when I read about this period, that the Millerites were at the tail end of the Second Great Awakening. So the Adventist movement was really post Second Great Awakening. Is my timetable correct? And did much of the stuff, the sort of more emotional part, sort of die out by the time the Adventists became a denomination in 1863? I mean, it seems to me that the Adventists, as far as their heritage, it certainly was out of the Second Great Awakening. But the other denominations in the United States seem to have left this charismatic thing all behind by 1860, 1870. Am I right or wrong in my interpretation of what was happening?
Wrong is written on that, but you are correct. Now the historians differ, but I think that, I mean, and we're talking in general terms, because with history you cannot precisely define, although we try. But by 1840s you still have the influence of the Second Great Awakening, and many historians believe that the Millerite movement was a part of that, and I think there's enough proof for that. But you are right that gradually it died out, and many denominations pull out of those what they began to call, you know, fanatical, you know, movements and so forth. That was the whole argument that also Adventists will deal with. But it still continued, as you said, until 1870s, 1880s. In fact, if you look at some of the early Adventist worships, and I have written I was asked to write a paper on that, you will see that they were quite charismatic in nature. Okay? Very similar to what you'll see in some of the Methodist, you know, worship circles and so forth. But you're right, it died, but it took few years. In fact, in Adventism, it's interesting that by the beginning of the 20th century, it died so much, right, that we became really a kind of dry religion. I mean, no emotions, nothing like that. So we went to the other extreme. But you're correct. But still, those influences, I think, continued, at least in early Adventism to a certain degree.
I had a comment, but I'll withdraw that. I'll start out with a question. That is, what I see here as questions and the controversy developed regarding any organization, people start to become defensive. Mm-hmm. In other words, they have to prove that their view is correct. Mm-hmm. And what I see now is that there tends to be a focus of the churches on creeds rather than so-called gospel. Is this the beginning of the development of creed? Because our church forefathers actually wanted to not to do anything with creeds at all at the beginning. And is it because of this defensiveness they started to feel that we have to define our beliefs better, and started with this?
It could be, but you're right that they were very much against, at least on paper, against creeds, because they came from the Christian connectionist, you know, environment, especially James White, Joseph Bates. I mean, they didn't want even to write their beliefs out, because they were afraid that it may lead them to creeds, right? So when they publish, and I'll mention that next time, when they publish our beliefs for the first time, 1872, that's the first time when we have a, you know, publication of what Adventists believed. James White took and wrote a long introduction telling people, hey, this is not creeds, okay? This may change, this because they were aware of that danger. But as in any, faith community, you come to a point where you defend what you believe. People ask you, why do you believe that? And even in your explanations, in a way, you're doing apologetics. You're trying to defend. So you will see, yeah, I think that they are doing apologetics. But they say, this is not a creed. In fact, that's why I mention it many times, because many Seventh-day Adventists are not aware the gift of prophecy was never a test of fellowship for the early Adventists. Because of that. They were afraid to have creeds, And they wrote against creeds. We have John Loughborough that writes against that and so forth. But yeah, in any denomination, you have to defend what you believe, and in a way you're doing apologetics.
Thank you, Ted, for your presentation. You gave us a good background of the 19th century that was rich in spiritual manifestations, all kind. And in this milieu, Ellen White emerged as a prophet. You mentioned that in 1840s and 50s, there were 5 people that were considered prophets, and Ellen White was one of them. In your research, did you find how was Ellen White different from the other 4 during, let's say, during the vision? How physical state was? It was something different from the other 4 when she was in vision, when they were in vision. Besides the fact that it was biblical, the message that they presented or not, but I'm talking about physically when they were in vision.
Good question. You will see that Adventists, so I'll start a little bit backtracking, but answering the question. You will see that Adventists did not use the physical manifestation arguments until later, until 1870s. Because a lot of the prophets, claim prophets, right? And now, I'm not making quiz falls through, okay? But a lot of the prophetic activities involved physical phenomena similar to what Ellen White displayed. Right? You have a description of a boy that I mentioned, I don't know if it's in the book or my research, but a description of a boy who didn't, who had open eyes, did not read for 7-8 hours and had a vision of how, his family needs to be converted and da. So, because of that, because they had a similar manifestation, Adventists did not use the supernatural, physically supernatural appearances as an argument for Ellen White initially. Now, they were forced to do this because you will see some people say, well, she's even not showing, the supernatural physical manifestations that others do. And they said, no, come and observe her. So they will begin to use that. They will be forced to do that. So in that sense, the other prophets, showed similar things, like they will fall on the floor, have open eyes, and so forth. Just one correction, when I mentioned that there were 5 prophets, it was only in Maine, in the area where Ellen White used to live, okay? So it's not all together. There were other people who claimed that. But at least that we know 5 that were in the area where Ellen White was. But good question, yes.
Okay, again, thank you very much for your presentation, other than the soccer. Great.
Okay, next time I'll mention baseball, okay?
You already got the yellow card.
Okay.
But seriously, kind of piggybacking up here, this was quite a common phenomenon, these visionaries. I'm sure if there were 5 in Portland, Maine, there probably was 5 in Boston or 20 in Boston. Yeah, sure. And by the way, I have to confess, I'm part of the Frozen Chosen, so I don't raise my hand in prayer and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like there's a lot of fallacies of logic going on here. That, number one, is if there are false, then there's got to be true. That's a fallacy. I don't see how we can carry that part. The other part is, it seems like early Adventists started out with a belief first, and then went for confirmation and this is a typical confirmation bias error. So, am I incorrect in some of these areas, or?
No, you're correct. I'll begin with the second point. You have Ellen White that claims I have visions, right? And so that's, but here's the difference. They did not say, oh my, she needs a doctor, she has a vision. Do you see the difference? Now they say, oh, okay, let's see, is it true or false? Okay, is it from the God or from, but that was the argumentation because of the environment. Now if I come with a vision today, I'm sure you will not say, well, he's a false prophet. You'll just say, man, this guy's sick. You see? So that's the difference. So they came to examining Ellen White from a different angle that we do today. And concerning your first point, that they are false and true, I mean, if you really think logically, they have a point. How do you have a false dollar if you don't have a true one? Okay? It's a counterfeit. So they use that logic. Now, how strong is that? It's another point. Okay? But they said, well, in order for you to have something that is false, you need to have something that is very similar. You see? And so anyway, this is just the first part. You will see that it became much more complicated. But a good point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's very interesting. He will be here again next week, and don't forget his book in case you would like to read what he has to say. And let's have our benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Happy Sabbath.